Hello, welcome to Endoor N-Gauge Model Railway. I've been enjoying continuing to improve the look of Endoor lately, and this is the third video in a row on the Scenic Progress theme. I've been wanting to get this new hill to look nice as soon as possible, and although the shape and structure of the removable part was done, I still needed to build up some of the land that leads into the hill. There were a couple of large chunks needed by the sidings, which I shaped from scraps of foam. They were straightforward to make. Less easy was the land going up and alongside the removable section. I made the mistake of wrapping the paper and glue shell of the removable part around its side, which resulted in it not being totally straight. It's left a bit of a gap that I'll need to pad out at some point. For now, I just started building up the shape of the permanently fixed part of land next to it. The middle mound drops away to the back of the layout, but in order to hide the view of trains coming out of the tunnel portal at the back of the layout, I needed to change its shape. I made a bit of a start on that a couple of weeks ago, by wetting, but not soaking, some pieces of toilet roll in glue and roughly squashing them in place. The idea was they would dry hard enough to build up some bulk for the approximate shape, without using up lots of paper and glue and taking an age to dry. They're also going onto a very unevenly shaped surface. I don't think I'd be able to cut a block of foam that would sit neatly on top of it. At that stage, it really did just look like someone had thrown wet toilet paper onto the layout, since that's basically what happened, so I was pretty keen to get another, better formed layer on top. I still needed to build up a fair bit more height into the land though, so added more non-saturated bits of paper. Once I thought I had enough height, I decided to cover it with glue-soaked kitchen roll paper, but that didn't look right and I decided to just turn it into more subsurface bulk. Unlike in my last video, these bits of toilet paper were soaked in neat PVA glue rather than diluted PVA glue, in the hope they'd dry more quickly and slip less whilst drying. I was pleased to find that if saturated, the toilet paper was still able to be spread and smoothed, which was good for making a top layer across joins in bits of foam and more roughly placed layers. I wasn't able to get a final shape at this stage as I needed to wait for lower layers to dry to build the necessary height and stay in place. I'm finding waiting for things to dry relatively frustrating, but it's an unavoidable part of this kind of hobby. At this point, the last round of ballasting was thoroughly dry though, so I could make more progress with that. There was one big clump of white glue that had somehow formed, so I scraped that away. This time around, various bits of ballast had floated and moved when soaked in the diluted PVA glue, so I spent a while chipping those off with a screwdriver. There was an area that seemed quite cloudy, so I tried to clean that up by scraping glue off the sleepers, and then again after wetting it a bit, but it didn't work. I don't know what's going on here. Maybe this area got some glue that wasn't properly diluted, and it might happen to be that lots of the bits of sand here are small, so it's made a kind of paste, or perhaps was too dense for the water and glue to properly soak through. Potentially I'll need to re-soak and excavate the ballast from this area and redo it. Once happy the sleepers and rails were free of bits of ballast, I gave the track a clean in the usual way. That didn't seem to disturb the ballast, which is good, but I'll probably need a new approach when I eventually paint the sides of the rails, because I think the cloth will end up taking some of the paint off. To test the track, I selected my Dapol pannier tank. This is a good test locomotive because it runs very well if the tracks are clean, but it struggles with slightly dirty track more than my other locomotives. It ran terribly over the ballasted track, and was basically okay on non-ballasted track, which itself hasn't been cleaned for more than a month. The track didn't look obviously dirty to me, but when I looked very closely, it clearly was. I do have a Pico track rubber somewhere, but I don't have any idea where it is. I haven't used it for several years because it scratches the rails and sheds lots of tiny bits, but I needed something at least a bit abrasive. A block of wood didn't seem to have any effect, but then I found a piece of T-gauge track cleaner. I was a bit apprehensive about using it because it's a very fine sandpaper, but one comes with every length of T-gauge track, so it can't be too bad. After cleaning half of the ballasted section with that, the pannier ran smoothly. Clearly I'm going to need some kind of track rubber for when I ballast more track, so I ordered a small gauge master track rubber that claims to be a bit kinder to track than other types. Whilst I was at it, I also ordered a few paints, since I'd be paying postage anyway, because I intend to paint the sides of the rails. I also decided to expand my ballast comparisons a bit, mostly out of my own curiosity, and found a couple of other brands marketed as suitable for N-gauge. And indulged in a bonus Mark II A coach in BR Blue Grey. After a day of drying, I was pleased to find the toilet paper and PVA had dried quite a lot. It wasn't all completely dry, but it wasn't far off. I'd also discovered that the ripples in kitchen roll on the hill weren't rock solid, so I had a go at sanding them. It didn't look like it made much difference. The areas with the ripples stay more opaque, but I could feel a big difference in surface smoothness. Some areas had become completely smooth, while others had got much better, if not completely smooth. The gap in this area between permanent and removable land was looking far too big though, so I trimmed the edge of the removable part to make it vertical and had a go at repositioning and slightly reshaping the block of land that goes next to it. At this stage I was very unsure about whether or not this would work. There aren't any electronics inside the lower land in this area, so I decided if this doesn't work out, I'll cut through the existing land and build most of it up from scratch out of foam, even if I need to buy more foam to get big enough pieces. Before proceeding to more ballasting, I tried sieving the chinchilla sand through a tea strainer, but essentially all of the sand went through. I don't think I have anything finer, so I carried on with the sand as it was. The next section of track at the front of the layout has points, which needed care. All of the points on Endoor are operated by horizontal rods in tubes. If bits of ballast or glue get inside the tubes, I imagine it will stop them working, and I doubt I'll be able to fix them without a lot of collateral destruction. For the first one, I made a little plasticard sleeve to cover the gap in the cork where the rodding sits, and having tested the point still worked with that in place, glued it using polycement. I don't know how well that kind of glue sticks to cork, but it should at least bond well to the plasticard and plastic sleepers and webbing of the track, and my hope was that it would form enough of a barrier to stop diluted PVA glue from seeping through to the point rod and tube. I arranged ballast very carefully, making sure I avoided pouring lots in areas that have moving parts of the points, and also making sure there weren't any pieces of ballast trapped where wheel flanges will need to pass. These points are operated by a solenoid motor, so I was able to move them by hand to check they were free to move. I didn't soak the area in as much glue as usual because I was worried about it soaking through to the point rodding. A few minutes later, a lot of it had started to soak in, and it was obvious several bits and clumps of ballast had floated to the wrong places. Fiddling with damp ballast could potentially be disastrous, but with some fine tweezers I was able to easily remove the unwanted bits before they stuck in place. It was easier to do it at this stage than it had been on the fully dried section. There were some areas where the glue was looking very white. It didn't look like it was likely to soak away, so I removed some of that from sleepers. A couple of hours after that, there were still some areas looking very white and opaque, so I tried soaking up excess glue with a cotton swab. It didn't make much difference though, and I didn't want to mess around with the damp ballast too much. I'm not really sure why this batch of glue seems to have behaved differently. Potentially I just accidentally got quite a different ratio of PVA to water. I did just pour on the water by eye. I had forgotten to do something about plugging the hole around a dropper wire near the end of the section I'd ballasted, so strategically placed a tub under the layout, but no glue made its way through. I then noticed some of the scenery seemed to have caved in a bit where I'd been adding wet toilet paper and kitchen roll. So when I next have time, I'm intending to cut out all of that section and build it back from foam. Having stocked up on scatters not very long ago, I was able to thickly cover the hill with neat PVA glue and apply a dense covering of scatter. I wasn't actually sure if I had enough scatter, so just did one section to start with, and it seemed like I'd have enough for the whole thing, so carried on. When painting the glue on, it highlighted ripples in the land. It had stopped being flat from when I sanded it, so the sanding must have just temporarily crushed it flat rather than actually eroding the ridges. However, the next day when I shook off the loose scatter, the ridges didn't look anywhere near as obvious, so it's worked out okay. My previous logic of painting the land a similar colour to the scatter to hide bald patches worked too well. It's made it quite hard to see where I need to apply more scatter, so I left the hill unpainted so it's obvious where I need to apply more scatter in the next round. Despite the thick application of glue and generous covering of scatter, there are still a few areas that need revisiting. I'll come back to those another time, possibly with a different blend of scatter. Several days have passed since I've done anything with the layout, and in that time the ballast over the points has dried clear, though I think some of the green paint from nearby has blended into the ballast a bit. The points don't really work anymore. They happily change to diverge, but usually fail to change back to their ahead position, and on one occasion only got part way, so there's clearly too much resistance now. Before the ballasting they used to change reliably. There's also loose ballast jumping around, and there are areas that I need to touch up with some grey paint, such as this wire I thought was low enough to be covered by the ballast. I'll need to think of a different solution for ballasting near the point rodding, because the ballast clearly needs to be properly soaked in glue. That's all for now though. Bye bye!